I think it was our role, including sanctions and threats of sanctions, that forced, in part, Yanukovych from office. Now, the question is, what can we do to support this new government? There's going to be a lot of talk about an assistance package. With respect to Ukraine, we have not sat on the sidelines. We have been very much involved. Members of the Senate who have been there, members of the State Department who have been on the square. The administration, the Obama administration, passed sanctions. The Senate was prepared to pass its own set of sanctions. And as I said, I really think that the clear position of the United States has in part been what has helped lead to this change in regime. So I know that there is merit in the claim that the United States sort of has these principles and then we selectively apply them. We get involved in certain places and then we don't get involved in other places. But I think if ultimately this is a peaceful transition to a new government in Ukraine, it'll be the United States on the streets of Ukraine who will be seen as a great friend in helping make that transition happen. This is really about supporting one of the biggest, most important countries in the Eurasian region, be able to determine for themselves what their future is. And it looks to people like this is the United States and Russia once again fighting, maybe not in military terms, but on economic terms in a country that we both care about. But really, ultimately, I think this is about us supporting the wishes of Ukraine. And, there is a U.S. interest here. We are in the middle of negotiating a new trade agreement with Europe. To my state, it's enormously important. We do 40% of our trade in Connecticut with Europe. If Ukraine is part of the European Union and thus is part of this new trade agreement with the United States, that could result in billions of dollars in new economic opportunities for the U.S. So we do have an economic interest in the Ukraine being part of the European Union, and we shouldn't be shy about making clear that interest.
Isn't it true that Yanukovych was elected for the first time in 2010 for one 5-year term? That elections were scheduled for 2015. The second point is, why is it okay for foreign ministers from other countries to show up during protest movements, let's say in Ukraine, like the foreign ministers of Poland and Germany, and support the protesters against the current government there? Wouldn't it be something similar to the foreign ministers of, let's say, Mexico and Canada showing up during the Occupy Wall Street movement and saying, yes, we agree that your government is corrupt? And the third point is, why isn't the West and America talking about the fact that a large or significant portion of the Ukrainian opposition right now is made up of far-right politicians, including from the party Svoboda, which openly is fascist and xenophobic, and they say that they don't want to join the EU because they consider the EU to be a bunch of gays and Jews, just as well as they say that they don't want to join the imperialist Moscow regime.
Let me take all those very quickly, one at a time. You're right. Yanukovych was elected, and I mentioned this before. I understand the difficult position here, which is that Yanukovych was elected, and we are not in the business of encouraging rebellions and revolutions on the streets against elected leaders, because we ultimately think that elections, as you mentioned, are the place in which you should settle your differences. The issue here is that Yanukovych lost his legitimacy to govern when he used force to try to break up these protests, and the United States didn't go on to that square in any meaningful way until the president tried to break up the peaceful protests. That's why Senator McCain and I went, and we certainly got a lot of grief from people asking why 2 U.S. senators are going to the square to support a protest movement against an elected government. We did that because we think that there were human rights and civil rights that were violated there, and we've always stood up for that concept. And again, I think that answers your second question as to why you had foreign ministers and foreign leaders who were on that square. It was because we're standing up for the idea that people should be able to lodge protests against their government. You are right that there is an element of the opposition that has some real radical ideas, and there is an element of anti-Semitism that was present on that square. I will tell you from having been there, if there were 500,000 people there, maybe a couple thousand of them represented that viewpoint. And so by and large, This movement completely rejects those radical and prejudicial ideas, and I have confidence that this new government is going to be inclusive and going to be tolerant, and it will be part of our job, I think, as members of the Foreign Relations Committee, to make sure that those kind of more radical elements don't have a seat at the middle of the table as the coalition government goes forward.